So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for attending the Copan scientific webinar. First, I would like to thank the chairman of the event, Professor Augenthaler, and the speaker, Professor Sambri. Before starting, I would like to give you some practical information. We kindly ask you to save your questions until the end of the lecture. To book a question, just raise your hand by pressing on the head button on the screen. And at the end of the presentation, I will let you ask your questions, or let's say you can just speak to start. During the speech, please leave the microphone muted for the optimal audio. And now I leave the floor to Professor Augenthaler, who can start, let's say, a first introduction, and then to the speaker, Professor Sambri. Thanks for your attention, and yeah, enjoy the talk.
Thank you very much, Irene. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. So good afternoon to everybody. I'm very pleased to share this moment with you. And first, I would like to thank Irene Acerbi and Mario Savarese, as well as Copan, having invited me to chair this afternoon with the presentation of Vittorio Sambri. What we learned with COVID-19 this year is very impressive. The whole world was overwhelmed and we were not prepared at all. I congratulate the industry for having developed in a very rapid manner new tests in order to detect this virus, which was totally unknown before. We speak about RT-PCR. This was very easy, quite easy to do. Then we had the antigen tests. Then came the antibody tests, IgG, IgM, IgA, and then we started to have very rapid tests. But what is the most impressive is a huge number of patients who contracted the COVID-19. And I remember also the very explosive manner of having new cases in Italy. And I was very sad to share this very impressive pandemic, which started always was very impressive in north of Italy, where also Professor Sambri is working, or at least close by. COVID has touched the whole world. Apparently not totally the same way through the whole world. Because now I'm speaking to you from Cameroon, and I'm very impressed that in Cameroon, I see in the whole morning with a city of Yaoundé of 2.7 million people, I see probably not more than 50 people with masks, and there are no sickness of COVID. So this will be a research which has to be addressed later. But it is very impressive that we are not apparently all the same. The most difficulty which came for the laboratories performing the tests with the techniques already mentioned was the overwhelming number. And we had a first wave in the spring, which finished more or less during the summer. But then we started again since a couple of weeks or 1 month or 1.5 months that we have a second wave, and maybe we will have a third wave. And this is the most challenging part, actually, to organize these tests, to understand what we do with positive tests and how we proceed with quarantines and isolation, and to offer these tests in an appropriate time, because I remember that in France, I saw queues in Paris of many hundreds of people waiting in a queue to obtain a test, and then the test was performed, but they received the results maybe only 10 days later or 1 week later, which is absolutely not useful. So the challenge is to perform tests with appropriate quality of tests and to obtain results in an appropriate time in order to have consequences for isolation or hospitalization or quarantine or whatever. And I'm very pleased today that Professor Vittorio Sambri, head of microbiology in Centro Servizi AOSL della Romania in Pieve Sestina, to us his experience with COVID in his region with very impressive number. So I would like to give the word to Professor Vittorio Sambri, and we are going to listen to him carefully. Please, as Irene stated it, write down your questions. We will answer the questions at the end of the presentation of Professor Sambri. So please, Professor Sambri, I give the word to you. Thank you, and we are listening carefully to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Aukenthaler, for this very kind invitation and the introduction. And I also want to thank Copan for organizing this webinar, and in particular Mario Savarese, that was the true actor of this story that I'm going to tell you this afternoon. So I want to start with my disclosure. Please check it carefully. And the agenda of this lecture of today afternoon is the one that you see in this slide. So we will try to provide you some detail about the COVID-19 integrated surveillance in Italy. We will discuss about the option about specimen collection type and priority. I will give you some hint about the Emilia Romagna, that's my region that is located in the south of northern Italy, health organization. And then we will go into much detail about the diagnostic workflow that we are putting in place and implementing in my laboratory since the last week of February this year. And we were seeking for automation, and we found out that automation can greatly improve the workflow. And of course, the final part of my presentation will be dedicated to the new universe that we had just acquired some, I would say, less than 10 days ago in my laboratory. So, of course, let me start with this slide that represents the surprise that we had during the appearance of the epidemic. So we were the first Western country to be involved in the epidemics after the Asian part of the world. So that was just starting end of February this year, and I must confess that I believe we are not really prepared for that. And the very first weeks were like living in a nightmare, because we were running out of the personal protection equipment, we were running out of reagents, so everything was, you know, not working. And consequently, we had a lot of problems, but we tried to organize, and I believe that the Italian can do it very well whenever they are in the right position to do. And then we started to work in order to set up these integrated surveillance data system in Italy. So these data, the data you see here in this slide, are representative of the last 30 days. So we had more than 700,000 cases, with more than 20,000 cases involving healthcare workers. In respect to the first wave, a very relevant modification is the median age of the cases in the last 30 days. In the first wave that lasted from February to, I would say, end of May, the average age of the involved people were much higher. And then we are experiencing the age you see here in the slide. There is no so much difference between the male to female ratio, and unfortunately, we still have a very high death toll that is affecting our patients suffering from COVID-19 in Italy. In the last 30 days, we had more than 7,000 deaths related to COVID-19. Fortunately, we still have quite good news because we have more than 100,000, almost 13,000 of people that recovered from the infection. Well, another difference that we had with the first wave, that as Professor Aukenthaler was just very nicely remembering, that mostly affected the northern part of our country, mostly. The southern part of Italy and the central and the southern part of Italy during the first wave was, I would say, only marginally involved. I mean, I cannot tell you the exact number of cases, but anyway, so the most relevant numbers of cases and deaths and involvement and hospital that were suffering was just located in three regions that were Lombardy, Veneto, and Emilia-Romagna. Nowadays, the second wave is involving more or less, I would say, not with so many differences all the nation, and that's of course because during the first wave we had quite a strong and fast lockdown system that was put in place some less than 2 weeks after the first case was detected, and that generated a lot of issue. And in this second wave, we are still trying not to get in the same situation, trying to keep the nation working as much as we can. This is, of course, because we want to keep our school functioning. We want to keep our industry manufacturing and so on. So it's not an easy task, but we do believe that this is so far quite feasible. At least we are still keeping the hope that a complete lockdown can be just avoided in this second wave. Okay. So coming to this slide, you see two different graphs that represent the proportion of COVID-19 cases notified in Italy according by age group. So you see that the very young and the very old are taken together are probably representing about 1/4 of the total people involved in COVID-19, while the large majority is represented by people from 19 to 50 in blue, and in dark blue from 51 to 70. This is a little bit different from the first wave, and even more relevant is the proportion of COVID-19 cases notified in Italy in the last 30 days, according to the clinical status and age group. So you see here the different bars represent different age groups from the very young to the very old. And it is of note that the number of asymptomatic patients detected and consequently reported is still very high. It is still very high. It is higher in the youngest and highest in the very, very old. But the proportion of asymptomatic patients that we do report per day is more than 50% in all the age classes. It is also of note that taken together the pouchy symptomatic and the mild infection, it's still very representative in these age group, with the older people that are experiencing severe and critical clinical situation. So this is probably because in respect to the first wave, we are right now trying to trace all the possible contact and to identify as much as we can all the asymptomatic, potentially infected people. During the first wave, what we were capable to do was just looking for the people that was knocking on the door of the hospital, of the ERs, saying, I'm sick. And we were working mainly on those people. And of course, the proportion of asymptomatic in respect to the symptomatic people was completely different because of these different approach to the management of the epidemic. Okay, so basically what we do right now is to work on nasopharyngeal swabs that are used to collect nasal secretion. I believe that we nationwide are using, I would say more than 90% of the laboratory are using the UTM from Copan. That can be very convenient for a different issue, for a different set of issue. First of all is that the sample can store the virus in a viable condition for quite a long time, but we will see that later on. And of course, it is really relevant that the collection of the nasopharyngeal secretion, the upper respiratory tract secretion, is currently performed in a right way. That means that no nasal swabs can be allowed. And if you look at this very small figure, you see that the right anatomical site to collect the nasopharyngeal swab is really a deep one. It's probably in the middle of the distance in between the eye and the hair, and you need to get there with the probe of the swabs and to rotate at least for 10-15 seconds to collect mucus and cell and so on. And then you can withdraw the swab from the patient, place the swab into the tube containing this red liquid, break because there is a very convenient breaking point, break the swab and send the swab after having identified correctly the patient on the swab to the laboratory. Well, why we are still working on nasopharyngeal specimen? That's because the CDC, the FDA, also the WHO and the ECDC are strongly suggesting that the nasopharyngeal swabs is the preferred biological sample to perform the diagnostic of COVID-19 by using molecular methods. Of course, nasopharyngeal specimen is number one, but also in the case when nasopharyngeal specimen cannot be taken, and this could be related to many different conditions, an oropharyngeal specimen or a nasal mid-turbinate swab are also acceptable. But the preferred swab in order to achieve the highest possible sensitivity is for sure the nasopharyngeal specimen. Okay, let's move to some detail about the Emilia Romagna healthcare organization. As you know, most of the healthcare in Italy is public, at least in the red region where I live. Is red just because of the map, but also because of the orientation of the government, probably. And we have three major territorial subdivisions. One is the so-called Area Vasta Emilia Nord that encompasses 4 provinces in the northeastern part of the region. One is Area Vasta Emilia Centrale that encompasses the capital city of Bologna and Ferrara, and one is Romagna where I work. That is the area in blue and light blue you see here. We are in the southern easternmost part of the region. We have also an additional subdivision of the territory that takes care of not only of the hospital, but the people that lives on this area. And so that we can imagine that all of these healthcare organization is really capillary put on the territory in order to take care as much as we can of all the inhabitants of this area. Well, coming to my laboratory, we are working in a centralized laboratory, consolidated laboratory that serves a network of hospitals in the area of Romagna. Actually, we had 14 different hospital, considering the big hospital, the large hospital, the smallest hospital. We still have 7 laboratories located inside the hospital. You see, we call it all LRR, that are located in the hospital, and they work for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we serve a population of about 1,200,000 inhabitants, not considering the huge number of tourists that we get each summer, even the last one, along the shore of the Adriatic Sea. That is for sure one of the most popular touristic spot in northern Italy. Okay, so we cannot spend too much time on that. And of course, being a consolidated laboratory and we are not located into any of the hospitals that we serve, but we are located just in the geographical middle of the area we serve. We are collecting sample from many different sampling points, including hospitals and territorial sampling point. And of course, the sample are transferred by trucks that many times can be in the situation you see in the right part of the slide, because the A14 is the highway that connects east to west the area, and it's plenty of touristic traffic from, I would say, end of May up to mid-October. Okay, so let's try to figure out how the organization works. So we have 15 hospital plus outpatient, and the sample can be collected in any of these outpatient sampling points or within the hospital. So during the first wave, we were receiving some 2,500 samples per day. Now we will see that the number is completely different. We were already using the UTM since the first wave. You see the sample traveling. They get into the laboratory where we start to prepare the sample for RT-PCR. And of course, we are following the complete process for NAAT processing. And I must underline that we have a kind of clinical sample priority list or sorting, because according to the clinical organization we do serve, we must report to the clinical side within 2 hours all of the samples that are classified with the red code. 6 hours is the turnaround time of the sample classified with the yellow code, and hopefully 24 hours will be the reporting time for the samples that are classified with the green code. Let's see what was happening in my laboratory since end of December 2019. This graph represents the percentage of respiratory sample that we were getting during the last week of December. And please note that the last week of December was already flu season. So in that week, we were receiving a daily average number of 41, and mostly were BAL, bronchoalveolar lavage, bronchoaspirate, excreate, nasopharyngeal aspirate, and only 12% was nasopharyngeal swabs. So let's move down. And this is the situation of the last week of October this year. So the percentage of nasopharyngeal swab was jumped to 99%, and you see how reduced was the remaining part of respiratory sample. But what is more impressive, that the average day of samples that we are receiving is more than 4,000. So it's some 100 times more than the last week of December in 2019. Of course, this is a huge amount of work, and that made us to try to find out new solution, new organization, new techniques, and everything to face this was possible to put in place to face with this, well, strong modification, I would say. The average daily sample for nasopharyngeal swab is here reported according to the weeks. From these are the last weeks of 2019. You see a very few per day, and this is the ramping line that states how many of these nasopharyngeal swabs we are collecting per day. Currently, the data you see in the slide are just related to the end of October, but in November we are getting higher and higher, and since the last 2 weeks we were receiving more than 6,000 per day. What happened when a sample arrives in my laboratory? We have, of course, at first the clinical sample sorting process, and we need to go for preparation of the sample to be analyzed with the different workflow we have in place. Basically, we work with three main analytical systems. One is the Panther from Logic. We have actually 3 of them in place. And to prepare the sample from the UTN tube to the Panther specific tube, we have a freedom even from Taken that can aliquot after the removal of the cap, that of course is performed mandatory under the biological safety level 2 hood, and we also need to remove the swabs that many times remain inside the tube. The second workflow that we have in place is again based on manual preparation of the tube, because we need to uncap the tube to put the tube on a starlet from Hamilton that prepare the PCR from C gene that we are working with, and that plate already prepared, and we go for the amplification steps performed in a series of CFX96 by RAD. Put in place since the last week a workflow that is based on machine from Diasorin, and of course we have a lot of manual prep because we do receive again UTN tubes, and the UTN tubes need to be transferred into the dedicated tubes we got for the antigen detection on the Liaison XL, and then again we need to go for transfer an aliquot of the UTM to the dedicated tube by putting the tube under the hood and working on by hand. Of course, all of these level of integration between the primary sample and the downstream analyzer was really too low, because it's basically manual. It requires time, it requires human resources, and it is at the very end also dangerous, because we are dealing with samples that are potentially infective. So this is probably one of the most relevant bottleneck of the testing capacity of my laboratory. So we decided to move and to find out some possible solution. Okay, so let's try to get some detailed information about the sample trip inside the lab, and with a special focus on the sample preparation. This is a slide that summarizes all the step-by-step event that each individual sample underwent when after the arrival in the laboratory. So first, we need to remove the sample from the biohazard bags. We need to classify the sample. We need to sort the sample into generic racks. We need to check in the sample into the LAS. We need to prepare the UTM for the capping as well and swab removal. We need to prepare secondary tube whenever they are required. We need to aliquot, and we need to close and storage. Well, sample arrival, removal for biohazard bags. You see how this is really a mess. We need to sample classify according to the red, green, and yellow lamp you saw before. And we need to sort into generic racks. Then the generic racks are brought to the check-in station in order to be checked in the laboratory information system. Please note that any tube that arrives into the laboratory has already being pre-checked by the sampling station out of the laboratory, so that we have a list in our LAS that should contain all the samples we are getting each day. And what we need to do is to say by focusing, by reading the barcode on the tube, okay, I got this tube, please LAS check if the tube is already enlisted in our work list that has been prepared from outside of the laboratory. And then we go for UTM rack under laminar flow because we need to decap. Many times we need to remove the swab in this way. That is anytime quite a scary procedure for the people that work under the hood. And we need to prepare the UTM tubes moving from the rack, the generic rack, to the TECAN rack, and loading the UTM on TECAN on this machine. And then the TECAN machine is capable to prepare the Panther tubes that are dedicated for that. But we do need to put the Panther tube in generic rack again, labeling them and loading into TECAN racks. It takes a lot of time. This is the TECAN machine during the aliquotation of the UTM for the preparation of the Panther or logic tubes. And then we need to unload the instrument and store the sample until the complete workflow has been concluded, has been finished, because in the case we get inconclusive result, we need to go back to the storage station, take out the inconclusive tube and repeat all the testing, starting from the aliquot again. So at the very end, we reach our goal, but we need to have about 1 hour to process 65 tubes. It's a very complicated test. At the very end, our capability is to process 65 tubes per hour, and this is not enough, because when you are dealing with more than 6,000 tubes per day, 65 samples per hour is really not enough. I remind you that this is the ramping of the swab that we are receiving. That's not me. That is the situation in December 2019. And that's the situation of my people working in October 2020. Because, well, it's very simple. It's very simple to understand that when you have to manage 40 samples a day, and when you have to manage more than 100 times more tubes, you need to improve a lot of modification, implement a lot of modification in the daily workflow. So how much are we away from collapsing? Because we have, of course, frustration in the personnel. They are not becoming green and bigger, but I know that they are quite hardly overloaded, and when you work in these kind of conditions, frustration is just behind the curtain. We are an increased biological risk. We also had some issue with turnover in the staff, because the people said, okay, guys, it has been a very nice adventure so far, but I need to have a more quiet life. So I take out and I resign my job, and I need to have some, more quiet life. And of course, we don't know how the increase of testing number could be in the next future. I hope it will be stable, but well, according to the experience that we had in the last 4 weeks, this certainty is quite weak. Okay. We know that because we have been working with the automation of the pre-analytical steps in bacteriology since the last 8 years, that a possible role for automation is available. And then, since we have experience with bacteriology, we say, why don't we try to move in the same direction? Of course, there is some idea about fully automation in molecular biology, because we have many, I would say, automated machine for the analytical steps available on the market for molecular biology, but like the Cobas system, 6,800 and so on, or the Logic Panther system, but they are just automation related to the analytical steps. You cannot just load the red capped tube you get from outside of the laboratory in this machine. You need to work, and I show you what is the work currently done in my laboratory, and so maybe we were missing some molecular biology fully automated solution. And then I got a call end of April or mid-April, I don't remember exactly, discussing with Copan, okay, we have experience in the automation of bacteriology. Why should not try to make the same, or having some idea ongoing in the, and this is the first picture of the machine I saw from Mario Savarese in April. And I said, yes, that's exactly what we need, because at that time we were still in the middle or in the central part of the first wave, but I believe that anyone working in the laboratory was just saying, okay, this first wave will be over someday, and we were already having some forecast of the resolution of the first wave in April. But I believe that most of us were already convinced that the second wave would have been arriving, and that's what we are getting in these days. So we right now are working with the Copan universe that has been installed mid-October. We started to validate 20th of October, and we had training session with my people starting at the beginning of November, and nowadays it's less than 2 weeks, and university is currently running UTM with the Logic and liaison tube in my laboratory since a couple of weeks. Let me try to explain what Copan Universe is. It's a front-end system specifically designed for the sample preparation in molecular biology, and not only, because as I just told, tubes. The liaison tubes are dedicated for the antigenic detection of specific protein coming out from the SARS-CoV-2 variant, and so Copan Universe can also be used for additional, tests rather than only molecular biology. So the principal feature of this machine is that is biologically safe, because it's completely controlled and under the surveillance of a BSL-2 laminar flow equipment is over the machine. The machine can vortex, is capable to decap and recap, is a very strong lipid handling, and it has a very precise label printer. That means you don't need to load tubes that needs to be labeled again once the aliquot has been prepared. So the new workflow that we have in our laboratory is put the UTM in the universe, and then the universe can prepare for starlet emitol just the capping, but it can the preparation of the aliquot for the Panther or Logic, and for the diazorin liaison tubes for the detection of antigen. And you see here there is no more manual intervention in the middle of the workflow. Of course, this is the workflow that we will have in the next weeks, because only one universe is not enough to manage all the tube that we are getting. Manual intervention in this workflow is still present. You can load different type of containers, and it works with the swab inside. That's an extremely pleasant surprise, I would say. When we firstly discussed it with Copan about this machine, we said, okay, we know we have a problem because having the swab inside is generating a lot of issue when we try to prepare the helicode by using the take-on system. Because anytime the take-on detects the presence of a swab inside, stops, and the technician needs to go inside the machine, take out the tube, the primary tube, remove the swabs. And so we decided not to leave the tube inside, the swab inside. And that's the reason for what we had these pre-extraction of all the swabs from the tube before loading the take-on instrument, because otherwise it will be a mess. I mean, the number of stops that we were getting was incredibly high. And actually, Universe works with the swab inside. We made a test, and basically the machine is capable to avoid the contact with the swab. You can have different output sample. You can work with deep well plate for extraction of nucleic acid, and this deep plate can be used with different extractors of nucleic acids. You can prepare secondary tube for, in our case, Panther. You can prepare secondary tube for antigen detection, in our case, liaison, or you can just aliquot in ordinary normal tube. And it is also possible to use the machine for pulling the sample, keeping the traceability for the sample. I must confess I'm not in favor of having any pool testing in COVID-19, but I also understand and I agree that under specific condition, the pooling system could be an acceptable solution. So by using the Universe, you can do that without losing any trace, without losing any traceability of your sample. So that this means that whenever a pool turns to be positive, you have just to go back to the map of the tube and say, okay, this pool is composed by sample A, B, C, D, and then you can just take it out and take them out, and it's very easy to test the original sample on an individual base. We performed the clinical evaluation because we wanted to be sure that performing the aliquoting with the Universe was safe in some way. So we started to do this test in 2 days, October 19 and 20. We just collected 150 UTM samples from the routine workflow. It's very easy, having more than 6,000 per day. We randomly selected 66 negative and 84 positive samples. And all the samples were tested 1 or 2 days before per manual internal flow using the Panther from Logic, sorry. The samples were consequently frozen and toward the day of the reprocessing with Copan Universe, and the TMA result obtained from sample processed automatically were compared with those obtained manually. You see here that the agreement is quite high. We had only 2 discrepant results, 2 negative by manual that turned to be positive by Universe, and on the other, vice versa, we had 3 negative with the Universe that were 2 negative by Universe that were positive, originally positive by manual. So the agreement was 96.7% with a very satisfactory value in PPA and NPA. So in order to solve these 5 discrepant results, the original tubes were tested, and it was done in parallel with the tube procedure, either manually or by using the Universe in the same day. And in this second testing, all the results were concordant. That means that probably the procedure of storing the tube in the freezer and then thawing, and then, you know, it could be that you lose something, and it was absolutely necessary to test the 5 discrepant tubes in parallel the same day, and at the very end the results were concordant. So next steps. What we would like to have, and what we are working to get from Copan, is a LAS connection in order to have the machine to perform a secure check-in. I wouldn't like to have any more people flashing and on the barcode of the tubes manually. We need to have further connection with the downstream analytical performance platforms. And at the very end, I'm expecting to have a change in the management. The implementation into the current chaos is really not that easy. I need to publicly and very happily thank all the people that works in my laboratory, because when I say, okay, guys, we have this possibility, and I don't know how much time we will need to spend on that. I don't know how much of you will be involved, but I know that this potential solution is absolutely necessary to our, I would say, survival time. And all of the people in my staff said, okay, we can do that. And they were quite enthusiastic, reacting to these like they usually do. And that's it for today. And I thank you for your attention, and I will be more than happy to take any question you may have. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Vittorio Sambri, for this very nice presentation. And I congratulate you for having coped with these difficulties of increasing numbers, which is actually the most difficult part for our laboratories. I may maybe ask a first question to you. You didn't give the answer how many tests you can perform hooking up Copan Universe to the other test systems like Panther and Hamilton and Liaison. How many tests can you perform per 24 hours?
Well, what we saw since the last days of operation of the universe in my laboratory is that the number of samples that the universe aliquoting procedure, or to any other procedure you may ask the machine to do. But in general, if you need to open the cap and to make an aliquot to reclose the cap, the number of samples is well over 100 per hour. I would say more than 125, but I believe that Copan Mario Savarese could be more, realistically answer to this question, because we are still in a situation in which people need to check the machine, and but our daily experience says yes, more than 120 per hour. It's really feasible. So if you can just
thank you very much for your answer, Professor Sambri. And this is also for me the opportunity to congratulate Copan and Mario Savarese and his team for having developed this instrumentation in a very short time. And I think it will be very useful actually already, and hopefully also in the future as adaptation for other techniques or methods or problems we have to solve in virology laboratories and so on. So maybe, Mario, could you state what you expect as numbers you can analyze or prepare with universe systems per day in the 24-hour?
Professor Augenthaler, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
So essentially, the reply by Professor Sambri was extremely correct because we are speaking about in the workflow of his laboratory of a productivity that is around 130 samples per hour when we refer to this movement of primary tube to secondary tube. Actually, when we are referring to the deep well way of working, over there the productivity raises to 220 samples per hour. So these are the two numbers that we have in mind in terms of productivity. Of course, when we speak about productivity, is the target productivity. Of course, in the real life, as we well know, in these days, with the first routine that we are approaching inside the laboratory of Professor Sambri, we are also seeing a lot of new things that we are learning, but actually the overall productivity remain what we stated.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario. Maybe Irene, did you receive questions we have to answer?
Yes, many. So I read the first one I see from Angela. Sorry, I don't see the full name. And the question is, which is the percentage of antigen test you perform out of the total?
We are currently trying to reach 1,000 per day over the total of 6,000. So it's less than 20%. But, you know, the availability of the DiaSorin test has just started end of October, so we are planning to increase. I would like to have at least 2,000 per day, so it could be 1/3 in the next month.
Thank you for your answer.
I see there are other questions. Yes. If you want, I can just read all of them.
Yeah, go ahead. Next question.
One is from Stuart from the UK. And he's asking is saying that in the UK, many clinical labs have struggled with the increased workflow. Do you foresee an increase of staff retention with the introduction of automation? Not really. I just foresee the increase of productivity of my laboratory because we. Since I forgot to tell you during my speech, but since the beginning of the COVID-19 workflow, end of February, we enrolled 25 people in between doctors and technicians. So we have now 25 people more because we are working 24-hour days for 7 days a week, and so that's absolutely necessary. And we don't foresee any reduction in the personnel, but we do want to have people working in a safer and possibly a little bit more relaxed way, and that will be also opening the possibility to increase the number of testing, especially in the antigenic section.
Thank you, Professor. Irene, do you have other questions?
Yes. Anonymous, do you still remove the swab that is attached to the cup before loading on Universe?
Actually, we are working with the large majority of tubes that are the 12 times 75 tubes. So the swabs that remain inside the tubes are not attached to the cap. They are just pushed inside the cap, and whenever you open the cap, they can jump like I don't know what is in English, but they can jump out of the tube. So that's a very dangerous situation for the people working under the hood. So we are trying to push on not having the swabs left inside the tube as much as we can, because we know for sure, because we proved that, and we already provided the data of these evaluation to Copan that is moving in the direction of modification of the instruction for use of the test of the tubes. But we have already proven that you will not get any single CT modification if you leave the tube inside if you leave the swab inside the tube, or if you remove the tube after a gentle swirling for 10 to 15 seconds. So it makes no sense to leave the tube inside. Really, it makes no sense. It's a dangerous situation for people that are collecting the sample. It's a dangerous situation for the people that need to remove the swab from the tube, and it's a waste of time. And so we are trying to push on that, but we still are, when you need to deal with so many people collecting samples, it's difficult to reach all of them in the same time. And yes, we are still removing the tube whenever we are not using the universe. If we are using the universe, we just leave the tube inside because we know that it works.
Good.
Thank you for this statement, Professor Sambri. It's very important, the question of these swabs, which we have to avoid to manipulate, because it's really dangerous. So this is a big advantage of automation of pre-analytics. Irene, do you have other questions?
Many. Which system do you use the universe for? All three, Diasorin, Panther, and Cygene you were mentioning?
Well, actually, we are focusing on the use of universe for Panther and for Diasorin, because the workflow that are required to prepare the tubes for these two instruments is really demanding in terms of time and human resources. The workflow that is necessary to perform the RT-PCR on the Cygene system is much simpler, because what you need to do is just to decap the tube and then, remove the swab if they are inside, but you don't need to make any aliquot, so it's easier and faster. So currently we are focusing on that, waiting for having more universe capacity to put everything under the same condition.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have other questions, Irene?
Yes. How did you cope with getting out your urgent sample results whilst introducing a new methodology?
Well, the new methodology is used basically for the green coded sample that are representing probably 95% of the total volume. What we are asking the people that is collecting the sample is to keep the red coded and the yellow coded sample apart from the other, because we cannot spend too much time in trying to identify them among the 6,000 we receive per day. And these two category of tubes, the green, the red and the yellow are tested by using not the tree system that I showed you, but we are using the CFATE system in order to process the red coded tube, and the liaison DX for the yellow coded tube. So the red and the yellow are just following a separate path in the laboratory because they needed to be processed as fast as we can.
Thank you. Irene, I have a question. How much time do we have left?
But, let's say there are a few questions left, many, I would say. Let's try I will stay 5 minutes more if you have the time, of course. And then
yes.
We can try to answer all the questions by email if necessary. There are two questions similar, talking about your idea about the saliva specimen for COVID diagnosis.
That's a very good question. That would be extremely interesting. for what I know from the literature so far, no test is really available for testing of saliva in the present days, and I believe that these will be our future, hopefully quite soon. And saying quite soon, I would say within 1 or 2 months maximum. Otherwise, we will get in trouble with the managing of these huge requests we are facing with daily. And of course, it will really depend on the pre-analytical step that could be required for the processing of saliva specimen, because so far the only way I am quite confident that can be used for treating saliva specimen is the RT-PCR. But if you need to go for RT-PCR on saliva specimen, well, that will be not very helpful for the laboratory, because you need to go for RT-PCR anyway. And I did in a different way.
Yeah, may I comment on this? I'm very happy that this question was asked, because clearly nasopharyngeal swabs is a discomfort. It's not easy, mainly if you have to repeat it. And as you know, I'm still working for SYNLAB, and we have commitments for various big industries and companies where we test a lot of patients or people which have once in a while to have been retested. And nasopharyngeal swabs is really a discomfort, as you said, Vittorio. You need at least to have your swab at least 10 seconds in your nose. So the problem is, in fact, I was looking for the literature concerning this. You obtain very similar results from saliva or from mouth washing. And just for your information, the Swiss government, Swiss health authorities have just allowed now that we can test in Switzerland saliva or mouth washing. And I think this will make things much easier. And when I looked at the literature, the results of sensitivity are very similar between saliva and nasopharynx. And so I think it would be important that we find out which is the optimal way to collect this saliva. And here I have the question to Copan and to Irena, or to, I don't know who is going to answer. What would you suggest to have an optimal collection device which I can put then into the to send by post office or whatever in order that it arrives to the lab? What would be the suggestion of Copan for transporting saliva? Irene?
Yes, let's say at this stage, as far as I know, we do not have, let's say, a solution. I don't know if there is some of my colleagues from the, let's say, collection device part, but let's say, I think it's something we may investigate.
It's important to investigate rapidly because, as Vittorio said, we need to have a correct answer within 1 month. Okay, Irene, take over. Do you have other questions?
Yes, I will choose just a few of them because there are many left. There is one where we can say something maybe on Copan side. They're asking when Universe will be launched in the market. Just for your information, Universe is ready for the market, so it has been launched already. And then I see another question from Israel, for example, and they ask which is the way you inactivate the infectivity of the sample before you load them on the Universe system.
Good question. Vittorio? Can you answer this?
I guess there is a network problem because I see him blocked.
I cannot answer the question because I'm not doing the test myself, so I don't know who could answer it from the audience eventually.
Irene, if you want, I can try to help.
Please.
Because on the universe, you don't need an inactivation step before, because the system is supplied with a laminar flow system, so it's designed to be fully secure. Of course, this system today transfer the aliquot from the primary tube that doesn't need to be inactivated before, and then transfer to a secondary tube. Multiple cases, the secondary tube or this secondary deep well include a lysis buffer or an inactivant. So actually on our system, there is not this need of having an inactivation step before the insertion into the instrument.
Thank you very much, Mario, for this answer. May I ask you, when you handle the tubes, what is the recommendation before you get into the vision system? Are you working with masks? What are the safety measures you recommend from Copan?
We actually recommend to maintain the current recommendation that are fully clear inside each laboratory, because our instrument has to be taken as a safe instrument, but of course for everything that is outside of the instrument we cannot be deemed responsible. So we strongly suggest to follow the current recommendation of safety, so maintaining for sure a glove, mask, and the coat that is currently used as a safety procedure inside the lab.
Thank you. This is an important statement, because we all understand that you have designed a wonderful instrument which is very safe and takes care of all the parts of pre-analytics in a very elegant way. And I can only congratulate Copan and you, Mario, and your staff for having done this in a record time. What we have noticed today, and I give this a little bit as a summary, we have noticed that we have a problem with workload, which we start to, in different ways, to solve. And it might be that the workload will continue to increase. We don't know when vaccines will come and what will mean the vaccines, because there will be other tests to be performed even for vaccinated people. We have understood that instrumentation like Copan Vision can help to support our staffs, which have become sometimes sick. Vittoria was saying about 2,000 healthcare people having been sick, I think. So I think it's important that we take care of our staffs and that we protect them from COVID during the work. And this is an important, an important moment of Copan Vision to support this attitude. So I think there will be further developments of Copan concerning this. I would like to give the final word to Mario in order that he can explain in which direction Copan would like to go in the next few months. Mario?
I'm sorry, I'm just getting back because I had some issue with my network, and I don't believe it can be helpful in answering these questions.
Sorry, I was asking Mario, what are the next steps of Copan concerning this technique?
Thank you so much, Professor Augenthaler. The idea of Copan is, of course, to run as much as possible to make this solution available to the highest possible number of laboratories around the world. This is our scope, because what we have realized is that this boom of sample is taking everybody under an unbelievable pressure. So the first goal is making possible the development of this automation and the deployment in the majority of the laboratory that today are undergoing this pressure. Of course, there are many more steps that can be fully automated. Of course, in this moment, we fully realized that COVID is killing almost the other kind of sample. But what we can easily forecast is that the adaptation of this automation can be much higher than just for COVID.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario, for this statement. So what I would like to conclude, because we have a time frame, I would like to thank again Professor Vittorio Sambri for his very excellent presentation, which was impressive concerning what he has developed and how he has an approach in order to cope with these huge numbers. I thank Copan, particularly Irene, having organized this meeting together with Mario, and I thank also the whole Copan family, with whom I have long-standing friendship. Especially also, please give my best regards to Stefania. I don't know if she's participating or not, so I look forward that you have in the future another webinar giving us the update of where we are going and how we can solve problems in such elegant way as we heard today. So thank you to all of you. Have a good evening, and hopefully one day we can meet all together in Brescia. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.